you have questions. I was planning to moderate a Q&A, but I think what is more important is that as you are here today, we just use this time to address all the questions you might have. And I want to first address these questions to either Steve or Cruz or myself, but also Lara, who has been so kind to be here. And after that, I think we can go into more practical questions with Katia and Gabriela about the Open Call, if you have any questions. So, do you have anyone who wants to start the conversation? Don't be shy.
I have a question for Lara. We refer to this notion of, that say architecture slowly becomes invisible. And in fact, it was a remark which was also introduced by Floris, that bodies were becoming invisible. But there seems to be this tendency of becoming invisible, and which is also in the common media referred to quite a lot. For instance, food production, every time, for instance, an animal becomes completely industrialized, becomes part of the food chain. It becomes invisible in a way, and through it also all kinds of questions on society, morality, and so on become also invisible. So, how do you see that? Has architecture truly become invisible? And if so, what does it mean?
I guess to me, in a way, it has become rather invisible, but we're seeing very strongly a resistance to that. So to me, we're kind of at the beginning of a wave of reclaiming physicality. If I think of someone like Frank Habermas, who in recent years has kind of removed drawings from the equation and just built himself, constructed himself. If I think about the fact that many of the objects out here are actually encouraging you to touch them. If I think about the fact that people are exploring within new technologies other structures that, actually one of my favorites recently, it's a funny building, this glass Chanel house, everyone knows this, right? And glass itself as a material, it was hailed as the modern material. It wouldn't leave traces, and it's not touchable, it's slippery, it's transparent, all of that. But this glass Chanel house, I stood there for 10 minutes and watched every passerby touch the bricks. Everyone. So something we're doing, something we're looking for, is asking attention for our environment in many ways. And although we're clearly not there yet, I think what you see historically is developments that kind of hit a final moment where, as artists, architects, poets, musicians, we resist and we look for alternate venues. And I guess that's the question to me to put out to people introducing something into the building.
Yeah, I wanted also to ask you, because we have been, even if we can claim about this a disappearance of architecture, and I agree with you. And yet there are certain spaces that are also emerging. Maybe architects are not that involved in their design. We can claim that the factory space is automated with a software used by Siemens, or we can say that there is a control room that primarily is designed by engineers.
Server spaces.
Yeah.
Server spaces.
Server spaces.
Take on this enormous, right now, physical
that occupy large parts, but we can say the public space is also being designed with this idea of surveillance, not necessarily by architects. Even if we didn't think about the architecture of the brain, it is also being transformed, not primarily by architects. So nevertheless, there is a construction of spaces, there's a construction of architectures, and I don't know yet if the designers are completely, or architects in this case, involved in the construction. But you are giving us the possibility to imagine through the historical examples that, if I read your presentation, I still see hope, I will say. Then maybe we have to address that we are not necessarily as the grand narratives of the modernists, that we can shape society at large, but do you still think that we have, if I understand correctly, a role in taking some decisions? Can you point it's a very difficult question, to a project that you think could be interesting, that we can learn some ideas or ways in which it was approached that could be enlightening for us. I think it's difficult to choose one, but if you have something in mind.
I'd be hesitant to select one, but first off, I'm not entirely sure that I can give hope, but I do believe that that is our task, that it is a requirement of this field, because I find it very hard to think of envisioning a new space or a new building by saying, well, I'm really going to screw up the world now. So somewhere at the very core of your discipline is a belief that what you have is a little bit better, than what we already have. To me, I'm intrigued by the bioengineering components. MIT has a silkworm pavilion. They built a structure that silkworms would actually, produce their threads, spin their threads around. There's someone in England experimenting with the calcium deposits of shells and how we could actually grow a building out of that. So I think that's one component that to me is very interesting, bioengineering, because that actually brings these technological and natural logics together more. From the perspective of scientific research, I'd say I'm very interested in the notion of distributed intelligence. In a way, that's what Floris was pointing to with his algorithms. I mean, we're now not only studying algorithms, but algorithms that build algorithms, which then program new systems. Maybe it will be our last big invention, but nevertheless, it's an interesting component. And then I guess, without waxing nostalgic, I think material experiments are becoming quite interesting. I think there's a lot of, the glass bricks are one example, but there are people experimenting with new productions of ceramics, with alternate forms of bricks built by sand and compression techniques. And I think often we have to turn to third world countries because of lack of resources, where these experiments are becoming quite visible.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about if we are talking about research at large as well, and we try to imagine that this pavilion, if anything, could become an opportunity to develop some research. Do you think, as an educator, if the projects that we are pointing to, and also the opportunities that we have in relation to automation and understanding our relation with machines, that should trigger changing a notion of architectural education? Because it's clear that practice should be changed, as Floris was pointing to. So the question if as practitioners we are faced with different challenges, maybe architectural education and the way in which we understand research should also be challenged in that sense. And the question,
that's a different topic.
Yes, I agree.
I think it's very telling that it's extremely telling that the academies of architecture keep running away with the art degrees. They're profession-based educations, and they experiment very specifically with the object at hand. But at the same time, we can't deny the reality that, big buildings require abstract thought. And so it's somewhere in between. I would be in practice if I weren't so, prefer to observe rather than offer answers. I think that's really the role of the people in the audience here. But I do think that there are that the mythology of the architect as a singular genius, that is already so past that there's no point in even going there anymore. I think collaborative projects are inevitable, and I think actually many of our institutions are beginning to incorporate that. But it also feels like a very kind of moment still emerging.
Yeah, actually I will go to you. Talk to Floris about something that to me is interesting in connection to practice and research, but maybe I should ask him in another time. But there are certain spaces that are emerging they are not necessarily being addressed from the point of view of norms in architecture. So what we see is there are like factories that are becoming dark spaces, robots don't need light, they don't need certain ventilation. You were talking about the data centers, something the same. But there is like the new interaction between bodies and technologies are also challenging ideas of what architecture is and what it could be. And there is also space there, and maybe also that was Floris was invited as chief architect to reflect upon how these new entanglements between bodies and machines are creating new architectures and how these architectures could be envisioned, could be regulated, or could lead to other possible futures. Because maybe if we understand also that connection and what is our role there, we won't be maybe catching up with technology, like feeling that the assembly line goes faster than we do, but we actually intervene and interfere in a way that we make that technology and the body are in sync somehow. So that was a random thought that I don't have obviously an answer, and I hope Floris will have one. You have a question?
Yes, well, I find this idea of the disappearing architecture to be interesting because if you see technology as a mechanism of survival for human bodies, then it would be kind of like a logical future to think within technologies like bioengineering that we use those technologies to make our bodies the architecture and make, and then get rid of all these systems that we have created to survive. And then also you can get rid maybe of the systems of control that architecture also plays a role in. So why would you even need buildings if your body is a building and you can protect yourself and maybe see even a scenario where cities are nothing like a stage in Last Country's Dogville where you can only delineate property or even not, because those are all effects of the systems that we have built. So maybe disappearing architecture is something that we are all aspiring to, maybe intuitively, or something that, it's just a train of thought, but maybe we could use the engineering to really make our bodies the architecture, and then get rid of buildings in a sense.
There's Archigram's dream come true right away.
Maybe also it's because I'm not an industrial designer that so the delineations are also very artificial, I think.
They are artificial, but I do think there are moments in time when we focus on one version or another. Buckminster Fuller was going to put a dome over all of Manhattan. In Silent Running, a 1970s film, we actually had covered the whole Earth as an artificial environment, set standard at a 27-degree temperature, and got rid of anything that was natural whatsoever. In fact, the last elements, our last ecological environments were shot into space with space pods, just to examine, some ideas that were around. I think right now we are going much more and more into the small scale. And I think there's a lot of value in that small scale, but I do, and maybe this ties to your question too, I do question what it means for the more anonymous large structures. I mean, in a way it's a resistance, right, to what we see, things that we have no control over. I mean, does anyone really know what Facebook and Apple is doing with their data? I mean, there is no control there. And in a way, focusing on the micro moments is a way of resisting that. But at some point, we are going to have to deal with it. And maybe that's part of the task ahead.
Just a little promotion. If you're interested in those questions, next Thursday we have our pre-excellent lecture at the New Institute with Paul Preciado. And Paul actually has been doing a lot of research projects about architecture as body. So thinking about expanding the notion of biopolitics from Michel Foucault and understanding the body as a site of architecture and control. So that it's not anymore external structures, but other questions that are pharmacological and some that are creating and affecting our bodies. So we invite you to come next Thursday.